Pipeline parameter binding is probably one of the most powerful aspects of Windows PowerShell. You can find documentation for pipeline parameter binding by looking at the full help for a particular commandlet's help. When you get to the per parameter breakdown, you'll find pipeline binding under the except pipeline input. If it's true, you'll be told which type of pipeline binding this parameter works with. There are two options: by property name, such as on this computer name parameter of getService, and by value, such as on this name property of getService. As you can see here, it's possible to accept input by value and by property name. Here's how by value works. Let's say I use a commandlet like getContent, which produces string objects. When I pipe those string objects to another commandlet like getService, it has to decide what to do with those input objects. In this case, because they're a string, it will attach them to the name parameter, which accepts pipeline input by value. Because the name parameter accepts strings and the input objects are strings, the data type or value type is what connects the input object to the name parameter. Even though other parameters, like computer name, may also accept a string, they do not bind pipeline input by value. They bind it by property name, which is slightly different. Only one parameter at a time can bind a particular pipeline input by value. In other words, if the name parameter is accepting strings by value, it is the only parameter which may do so. Other parameters may accept pipeline input by value, provided they accept a different type of data. Nobody else can accept a string. Pipeline parameter binding by property name works slightly differently. Let's say that I'm importing a CSV file that has two column names. The first column is computer name, and the second column is description. Import CSV will place objects into the pipeline with these two properties. So for each line in the CSV file, an object will be produced that has a computer name property and a description property. When I pipe those objects to another commandlet, such as new PS session, it needs to know what to do with those input objects. In the case of new PS session, the computer name parameter binds pipeline input by property name, same as it does with the getService commandlet's computer name parameter. In this case, because I have an input object property named computer name, in other words, the property name matches the parameter name, the computer names from the CSV file will be matched to the computer name parameter of new PS session. Let's take a look at that example and see how it actually works. I'll ask for help on new PS session, and I need to make sure I'm reading the full help. When I get to the computer name parameter, you can see that it does accept pipeline input by value. It also accepts by property name. By property name is what we'll be using. I have a CSV file called computers.csv, and it contains 3 lines. As you can see, each of those has been created into an object in the pipeline, and the column headings or field names within the CSV file itself determine these property names. So each of these 3 objects has a computer name property and a description property. I can pipe those directly to new PS session, and it will attempt to create a new PS session to each of these 3 computers by attaching the computer name property to its computer name parameter. Now, some of those computers weren't able to be reached, and that's okay. The commandlet will keep going, and it will create a session for the one it was able to reach. Since I don't plan on using those sessions right away, I'm going to go ahead and remove them. So that's pipeline binding by property name. The trick is that the input object property must exactly match the parameter name that you expect to hook it up to. Now, this isn't the case for every single commandlet. For example, if we look at the help for getWMyObject, again making sure that we look at the full help, when we get down to the computer name property, you can see that for this particular commandlet, The computer name parameter does not accept pipeline input, so I couldn't use that same trick with this particular commandlet. Unfortunately, the use of pipeline input binding is a little bit inconsistent across different commandlets. So let's look at how this might work with a by value parameter binding. I have a text file called services.txt, and it contains the name 4 different services. By piping those to getService, I can have the getService commandlet get just those services. What's happening is that these 4 strings are being bound by value to the name parameter of getService. So I'm telling it the name